Здравейте!
Здравейте! Добро утро и добре дошли на четвъртия ден на конференцията на За Земята Чиста енергия за хората, организирана с подкрепата на E3G и мрежата Bankwatch. Аз съм Радостина Славкова и съм част от енергийния екип на За Земята. Координирам работата ни по преход отвъд въглищата, но също и с избягване на нови изключващи проекти в изкопаеми горива, като природен газ или както също се нарича изкопаем газ. Разбира се, разглеждаме и предлагането на енергия, а също и консумацията, включително от гледна точка как може да се минимизират нивата на енергийна бедност в страната ни, което беше част от магистърската ми теза, а днес ще ви запозная накратко и с изводи от наше социологическо проучване. Енергийната бедност, нейните решения и каква е реалността в България е темата на четвъртият ни ден от конференцията. Днешната програма е разделена отново на 3 панела, като първият панел ще бъде изцяло на български език с 4 лектори. Вторият панел ще бъде проведен изцяло на английски.
The second panel will be entirely in English. The third and last for the day will be split in two. The first presentations will be in English, followed by Q&A session. The next two will be in Bulgarian, again with the possibility to ask questions. Comments, questions you can place in the Zoom chat and the Facebook and YouTube streams. I will ask our foreign guests to select the interpretation icon in Zoom. Our first panel will be held entirely in Bulgarian. The topic of the first panel today is energy sufficiency versus energy poverty. How the two concepts are interlinked. How can energy sufficiency decrease energy poverty in the country? A sufficient consumption level would provide not only for the needs of energy-poor households, in accordance with the specificities of each household. As you know, elderly families or families with young children have differing needs of hot water and heating when compared against a young family. That's why it's important to first compare and assess who needs what. I will share my screen with you right now. I will briefly go over our sociological study. My colleague Svetoslav said a few words on Monday. You may have noticed that he was the one who had to deliver this presentation, but he was invited to participate in a TV show together with my colleague Ivailo Popov. They will join us later today. A few words on the interviews in the sociological survey that we carried out. We did this survey in the beginning of August last year. It covered the area of Velingrad. It is close to Sofia. It is known for lower income levels. We had 3 main target groups that we attempted to interview. Mr. Pavel Volchev is the person who drafted the report. He will present to you an even newer research on the topic of attitudes to energy renovation programs. He is going to talk about this later in the panel. The target groups of energy-poor households that we interviewed were the following. First, young households, young families with children, mostly in the area of the town of Velingrad. We interviewed 10 households of elderly people who are already retired. We also interviewed 10 Roma households in the Kanezica neighborhood of the town of Velingrad. Another important criteria for the interviews was the income level. As you can see, the biggest part of our respondents, 16 of our interviews, have an income below 369 lev, in other words, poor families. We had two other brackets, income brackets. Another criteria was whether the family lives in single-family residence or multi-family residence, almost equally split between types of residences. It will probably come as no surprise to people familiar with energy poverty in Bulgaria that firewood was the preferred manner of heating. All Roma households use firewood for heating. 9 out of 10 elderly households use firewood for heating, whereas with younger families, with children, a smaller number uses firewood for heating. That was 3 out of 10 households. By far, it was not their preferred manner of heating for majority of the respondents, even though for many of them it was the only accessible way to heat their homes, mostly because of their income levels. Another interesting question was how many of their rooms they heat. Often they responded, we heat our entire house, but in fact what they did was heat 1 or 2 rooms of their house. The good news is that most households were able to maintain a comfortable temperature during winter in their rooms between 18 and 22 degrees centigrade. Regarding the targeted home heating assistance provided by the state, there were questions in the interviews regarding their attitudes to this assistance scheme, for the overall administrative procedure, the difficulties of receiving such assistance, whether it is sufficient, what are the obstacles to households who do not receive such assistance right now, what were the reasons for that. Back to the manner of heating. As I said in the beginning, the financial situation is the main reason why they prefer one method of heating to another. So this is the answer that households gave. That's what we can afford. Or, due to the high prices, this is what we opted for. Low incomes stopped people from seeking alternatives, as well as the lack of information. Many of them replied, I do not know about any other ways to heat my home. There were also objective reasons why they could not choose an alternative manner of heating. That is the reason that they rent, and the owner does not allow them to change their heating system. One of the key questions in the survey was how would they feel about changes to the way targeted home heating assistance is distributed. Would they prefer for the scheme to be more widely available but with smaller amounts per households and requirement for a minimum self-owned participation, or the reverse, cover fewer households but provide greater funds per household? The answers are self-explanatory. 26 of 30 interviewed households prefer that everyone has access to these programs, even though it means smaller amounts per household. There were few households who proposed that fewer households are covered with greater funds. They argued that these funds should go indeed to the most vulnerable. Now back to the energy assistance and what obstacles people met with. One of the hurdles was that the procedure is still complicated. There is no easy access to information, what the steps are and how they can apply.
Но това отново е въпрос на интерпретация и няма достатъчна информация в общественото пространство.
There is lack of information. Who has access to programs for assisting households who are not extremely poor? There is no understanding of what extremely poor means as well. Also, there is no faith in the system. People don't believe that they will receive assistance even if they applied. This is especially prevalent as a belief in smaller dwellings. Another question that we asked was, were people willing to make use of the so-called free energy consultations under the reform of one-stop shop under the Recovery and Resilience Fund? My colleague Nikolai Petkov will give you more details about that later. At this point, I would like to say that the idea behind this reform was met with very positive attitudes on the part of households. Households, in fact, gave ideas how to make this scheme more affordable to them. They said what they would expect from such an expert when providing them with information. They would like him to give them energy recommendations on the spot. The main findings from our survey was that firewood is the main heating source for energy-poor households. Mostly in households that are not covered by the energy assistance schemes. It will come as no surprise to you that Roma households and elderly households are most reluctant to change their current way of heating their homes, they would have far more questions. It would take a lot more to convince them of the benefits. The good news is that younger households have more positive attitudes. They would like to make use of certain low-carbon technologies, such as using pellets. Lack of information is the main problem which we identified, as well as the complicated procedures, red tape. And that is why changes to the assistance scheme is something that respondents would like to see. Those of them who have already received energy assistance overall are happy with the amount of support they received. All of them would like free consultations under the one-stop shop. The conclusion is that it is better to cover more people under the assistance scheme, even if the amounts per households would be smaller. And this goes contrary to the current programs, including the energy renovation programs. Perhaps the most positive finding of the whole survey is that indeed we do not have to convince energy poor households why they should improve their home, or how energy efficiency measures impact the temperature of the house. They already know this. They realize that it is a very sensible and necessary measure. In fact, they have made some home improvements, but not under any of the national programs. They have seen for themselves some of the benefits. They are convinced that they are important and would go further. However, they need more information, which is well-structured, easily accessible, and convincing. That is all that I would like to present to you. Now allow me to present to you our next speaker, Mrs. Asya Dobrudjelieva, Project Manager at Habitat for Humanity Bulgaria. She coordinates the Coalition for Improving Living Conditions and Dignified Living Conditions.
One-stop shop will be able to respond. Something important about one-stop shops, which should be kept in mind, it is possible for initial investment to take years, 1 or 2 years, to be paid back. People might not have funds to invest, and this is the most important thing which I wanted to tell you. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Nikolai. Your presentation was very interesting. Let me add that these are some of our recommendations. They will be supplemented, but the initial ones will be published very soon. I have a specific question to you regarding the role of the so-called social workers and another role, mediators working in the field, in the Roma population neighborhoods. How do you see their role? Are part of the one-stop shop service, would they be able to have a more active role, or at least help disseminate information that such a type of energy service exists?
Surely, such mediators will play a very important role, because people indeed have to be informed in the proper way. Initially, trust in such projects and such one-stop shops would be low, but we have to show why it's important and necessary. Many people in Bulgaria heat their houses in very inappropriate ways. In fact, we have a lot of energy poverty in our region. Indeed, all the people that we talk about, the ones that I said are 90% of the cases, they live in illegal dwellings. So they will have no right, no access to funding at all, for as long as their dwellings are illegal. They can be informed, but they will not have access to these programs. Well, yeah, before any measures on regulating their property. Another quick question to Nikki. Expanding one-stop shops as places for training, could you say a few more words? What kind of experts do you recommend be trained and upskilled there? Specifically on this topic, I do not have sufficient information. Apologies, I can't answer that, but I will look into it and will put it in writing later. A few words I'd like to add here. Training experts at the one-stop shops does not seem like a good idea to me. Training experts on matters of energy efficiency, designing and auditing for energy efficiency, it cannot be done by people who are part of the one-stop shops. I don't think one-stop shops are the place to train professionals. I think that society at large should be able to get sufficient information at the one-stop shop and be further informed about the process and the energy efficiency measures that can be applied in their homes, that society as a whole can receive such information at the one-stop shops in order to enable them to choose what to do. In fact, they don't have that much choice because energy audits are supposed to give precise recommendations to be followed. Maybe some of the measures proposed could be discussed because there could be alternative options, but I do not think that this proposal to train professionals at the one-stop shops is appropriate. I don't think this is the place for upskilling experts, in my opinion. Thank you, Asia. Yes, we are still working on our proposal. All in all, we want to use this type of future structures in such a way as to be able to train the so-called energy advisors who are not necessarily people holding degrees in this area, such as energy auditors are. We want the one-stop shops to be part of a training structure as a learning hub. We could test run the idea in some municipalities, and if the results are good, we could replicate that. I see that Theodora raised her hand. You have the floor before we give you the floor for your presentation. Yes, to join in the current discussion. That's the way I see it too. Energy advisors and administrators to coordinate the process. Administrators, not energy auditors, but these are administrators who must have certain technical knowledge so they would need training. To complement Radustina's question on social services and their employees, in my opinion, their role is in the energy poverty assessment. If energy poverty assessment has two components, energy costs and income, I only see the social services role regarding their incomes and not at the one-stop shop, but at their own offices where they issue certificates pertaining to income. And then the energy advisors using energy calculators could, in a very simplified way, do the necessary calculation. In fact, the citizens themselves could do that once they receive this income certificate. Then, at the one-stop shops, this information can be validated in terms of energy costs. This is what I wanted to add on. Can you hear me? Yes, thank you. You have the floor to tell us more about your work on the definition of energy poverty. Well, this is precisely the idea behind the methodology we developed. Can you see my screen? Yes, we do. On the 9th of March, we presented our proposal for energy poverty definition. It is more or less widely accepted in Bulgaria because apart from the Economic Research Institute at the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences, NFECT also have their view, which more or less overlaps with ours. In our view, for Bulgaria, this is the disposable income after energy costs. There is a report which is currently edited and will soon be published. We at the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences explain in detail why this should be the definition and not something else. This definition meets all the conditions for our country. It effectively reflects low income and the volatility of energy prices, and respectively energy efficiency measures for the buildings. In other words, this formula comprises everything rather efficiently. There is an individual poverty line. I will show you later in my presentation that for different families there is a different energy poverty line depending on the type of home they have. If their home has worse energy performance, then their energy poverty will be higher. I will give you specific examples to that effect. Why do I say that? EU recommendations and the recommendations of the Energy Observatory in Brussels outlines a range of indicators, a range of groups. The subjective one is ruled out from the research that we did because it does not meet price volatility, be it about energy prices or volatility of income. It does not account for the economic dynamics in Bulgaria. The cost approach in these recommendations plans for double median, half a median. After we opted for this definition, allow me to clarify today the missing component from our last roundtable in March was the quantitative dimension of the energy cost. Over the last 2 or 3 months, jointly with the Bulgarian-Austrian consulting company, we were able to test this in real life in a range of buildings and households in Sofia in order to see how adequate it is, how far it reflects the situation in households and the energy efficiency needs. Together with the engineers from the Bulgarian-Austrian consulting company, we developed a new proposal. Now it reflects the need for such poverty much better. What was the initial proposal? It included 4 components: net income per household, quantity of energy per household for heating, also for electrical appliances and hot water. Then it was multiplied by the energy costs per household in the region. In the beginning, we provided for a baseline quantity, which is standard for 3 types of areas, and a couple of coefficients for the type of heating, climate area, type of building, and others. We received a lot of proposals because we had the privilege of having many specialists from many organizations when we presented our work initially. Many of them are present here right now, also ministry representatives, agency representatives. The most important part of the proposal back then is that there should be differing components for electrical appliances, heating, and hot water. Also, a recommendation to take into account the climate, the type of building, and add on criteria about ownership, a clear differentiation between domestic and non-domestic needs of households, and avoid conflict with other needs, such as food products, for example. That's exactly what we're witnessing right now in the context of inflation. Food costs soar, but it does not affect the energy costs because they are outside the poverty line. Currently, food costs soar more. So this is the problem with the official poverty line right now, but it would not be an issue when we're discussing the future line of energy poverty, which at any given time would reflect correctly the increase in energy prices. Then also we would like to take into account whether people are counted as individuals or as households or as families. We drafted a questionnaire. We tested it first with households of income below 710 Bulgarian lei per month per household member. We found that in principle, in any building in Sofia, 30 or 40% of households state they cannot co-fund energy efficiency measures. That's why we expanded the income criteria to 1,200 Bulgarian lei. And then for the last sections, we tried to interview all of the people in a building, so the income criteria went up to 1,400 Bulgarian lev. Of course, there is a percentage who do not want to be interviewed at all. 10 to 20% of people in buildings do not want to be interviewed. Usually, these are the high-income families, so they are not affected in any way, either way.
We came across different challenges that the amount of floorage area initially in the methodology for determining the needs of household was very low. If you have renovation, you don't renovate 40 or 60 square meters, but the entire floorage area. We had also included all type of heating. In Sofia, they use district heating companies or electricity energy. Of course, some households with lowest income used to heat themselves using firewood, but when we did our methodology, the estimations were that we calculate their needs in terms of energy in amount in Bulgarian lev. It would turn out that they wouldn't be established as energy poor because they're energy poor. So we decided to determine the type of heating source depending on the type of building. So if this is a building in the city, probably it wasn't meant for heating with firewood. Another problem was that heating using firewood would be 50% of the price of heating with electricity. This price difference will be changed with the central heating company raising the prices, but the people using the most expensive resources would have the poverty line raised. Another problem that the quantity of energy for other sources in one of the presentations of the ministry, there was a presentation defining vulnerable groups as 150 kilowatt hours per month. If we applied our methodology, this turns out to be insufficient. What's more, it included the need for heating water, and if we did the calculation with this, it would turn out that people now spend even more than under our methodology. So in general, they don't consume enough, and with this methodology it would provide them less energy than they currently need, and it would not lead them to a comfort level of 21 degrees in the winter time, let alone cover other needs. The third issue is that in general these methodologies in the UK and elsewhere, they have two modes, full use mode and half mode. If there is a vulnerable member of the family, they would use 24-hour heating. In Bulgaria, a large part of households have a vulnerable member, so it is not only an economic but also social issue. As regards the methodological issues, we don't have enough time, but I'm going to show you the new proposal for our standard on energy poverty. It starts with another philosophy. It is based on the fact that the basic quality of energy necessary for heating is 45 kilowatt hour per square meters for one season of 5 months, after which we would have an index of climate zone. This index is available in an ordinance. It is used by all energy auditors. This ordinance is available, accessible, so this index is easy to calculate. So we have put in a factor what type of construction we have, what are the walls made of measures of energy efficiency, heatable area. This is 90% of the floorage area, and only afterwards do we impose the 12 or 24-hour mode of heating, and then the price of heating. This is at the foundation of a new standard for heating, 45 kilowatt hour for an energy inefficient building. This could even drop to 25 kilowatt hours to square meters at different degrees. The second component is the following. We decided to place the domestic hot water to a different component. This is 60% of the 45 kilowatt hour. We use the data by Bulgarian Austrian consultancy company, and then we would index with the number of members of the household, and then we would take into account the floorage area and then the price for heating the water. Then component number 3, cooling. This is a calculation by EVN. So this component is additional, and we have an unresolved issue that the day hours for heating is officially published in an ordinance. However, we don't have such a thing for day hours for cooling, and we also have a climate zone index. The methodology follows the previous ones, but we have reduced the length of the cooling to 2 months a year. And lastly, the basic quality for electrical appliances is 12% of item 1. This is the average percent following energy surveys of buildings by Bulgarian Austrian consulting company, and not only. So together these 4 elements form the energy needs standards per one person inhabiting a 60 square meter flat. In Sofia we have 2,900 day degrees in a year. You can see the energy for heating, for water, for cooling and electrical appliances. The first 3 columns are for apartments in buildings in brick walls, and the last 3 columns to the right are for buildings in concrete panel blocks of flats. When measures of energy efficiency have not been taken, this is the left column, then the middle column is in case the windows are changed, and the right one in case all energy efficiency measures have been taken. So when applying the price component, you can see that this is about 1,233 leva per year without energy efficiency measures. And in case central heating is used, and 1,511 per year if electricity is used and not central heating. If you apply this with the energy poverty line, this means that you need to have income under 572, which would decrease or increase depending on the configurations of the building, the home. We haven't put the mode of heating, whether half day or full day. No, this is at full day heating mode. So this is the basic income criteria for energy poverty. For a flat in a multifamily building of 60 square meters, these would be families with a pensioner, with a person who is unemployed there, or with a person with disabilities in them. So this is a low threshold. Speaking of one person, if there is a family of 2 pensioners, then the standard is increased because the warming water component is higher. And we're speaking about a flat of 70 square meters, I have chosen only certain types of household to present to you, and when we have two pensioners in Plovdiv, there is a slightly lower amount because there is a shorter period of winter, and a family with 2 kids, so 4 people, would have much higher heating needs, and for electrical appliances as well. Here again we have this line of energy. Poverty is higher, especially if they are living in a concrete panel block of flats, especially without energy efficiency measures. It's 676, but there are additional measures, different questions whether we would apply the ratios depending on the incomes, whether we would take the average income per parent, then if this is used per person, and this should be 1,351 level for a concrete panel block of flats without energy efficiency measures. So there are a lot of things to be discussed in a working group, which is still to happen. We cannot take a definition without discussing all the details and how the criteria are determined. But the good thing is that we have systematized them as issues, challenges, and respectively we have provided a proposal like basic criteria. Firstly, it's important to apply the prices of the energy resources for the upcoming season and to involve this in all the assessment after May, including forthcoming measures, because this is what will determine whether a certain household will have excess funds for energy efficiency measures. Climate index could be different depending on different municipalities. We should take into account the different day degrees. This should be specified in a working group, whether it would be possible to have 28 different regions with different climate indexes. This is possible in general. The income criteria, what I presented in the tables, has been calculated on the basis of the official poverty line at 469 level, while this year the Ministry of Social Affairs calculated by 413, but if we use Eurostat's criteria it would need to be 469 levels, so we need to use Eurostat's official methodology and then add the individual energy cost component. And there is a criterion for real estate. We established that most of the households have not more than one apartment, so this will probably be decided with the criteria about movable property. Probably this would be a problem. In the definition we have concrete proposals, and this will be decided using the REGIX system by the Social Assistance Agency, and where an income certificate is to be issued, such criteria could be used instead of every household being determined this individually. People not always know how much taxes they pay. Different amounts were provided for different for same area apartments. So these things should be issued through REGIX administratively. Lastly, let me summarize that in terms of characteristics, it's important that this poverty line combines a relative and absolute approach. The relative one is one part, the absolute is measuring the energy a certain household needs. This assessment of individual needs is resolved with a poll including not more than 15 questions with not more than 5 or 6 questions which need to be validated. So this is simplification of the whole methodology for an energy audit in a very adequate way, as we have established in this survey, and this is a step which could simplify the whole process of renovation, because we need to make an attempt to validate whether a certain family is energy poor or not, and if there is a higher cost, who would pay for it. And there needs to be a validation, but if the methodology is simplified, this cost will be much lower. So mainly buildings in cities with such programs in place will be applying. This will be gradual, not for the entire population at the same time. So I would like to dispel any concerns, especially on part of the social ministry, that the administrative system would be overloaded. This will not happen if a simplified methodology is applied, if the administration of this methodology for the cost of energy is provided to these one-stop shops with energy auditors, in order to have more licensed organizations to carry out the energy cost component, and if we minimize the participation of social services to issuing of certificates about the income. Another advantage of this is that this could reflect at the national level the progress, not only on programs but the individual energy efficiency measures, because if you include 2 or 3 more questions in the National Statistical Institute surveys, you would get the entire picture. Lastly, another benefit of such energy poverty line is that at any possible time, if we have data for the whole population, we would just add 3 additional measures on energy efficiency measures and heating system. And right away we could calculate 40% growth in central heating prices, how this would affect energy poverty. A critical point is whether the population would be able to take this rise of energy prices. The National Statistical Institute has information about the whole Bulgaria. It can direct us where the problem is more intense, and I can share a lot more, but I'm running out of time. Thank you for bearing with me.
Благодаря и аз, Теодора, беше много интересно.
Thank you, Theodora. It was very interesting indeed. Just a few questions, because I didn't understand something. I became a bit lost. If you could explain this to me, is there a differentiation for people who live in social housing or people who don't own their flat? Will there be an increase of the energy poverty line for them? How exactly is the methodology applied? Or when they live in single-family homes, let's say in some remote village, they have 200 square meters area in their home, but they only heat 1 room in it. Yes, thank you very much indeed for this question, for clarification. Indeed, I was not able to cover everything. There is a separate coefficient for a building. So if there is 45 kilowatt hours, as the baseline in the beginning, as I said, it's for a flat with high energy efficiency performance. For a house, this is almost double, 90 kilowatt hours. First of all, houses have many external walls. The simplification ruled out the percentage of external walls, even though they could be included. We're looking for the most efficient method. When we're looking at a single family home, the baseline would be a lot higher. If the average cost for one person in a flat, let me show you on this slide. Let's say that heating here is 4,860, then it would be 9,000. So the calculator would provide, instead of for 103 for energy, there will be at least 200 per month. Next. Here are the challenges. This definition does not solve them. They should be solved under a mechanism for energy poverty. Let's differentiate between these things: methodology, criteria, definition, or mechanism. This has to take into account municipal housing, social housing, where the state actually pays. This is a huge problem because the state does not actually maintain these houses. So there is no resource set aside for that. When developing energy poverty mechanism, we have to really think about the creation of additional funds for municipal housing as a whole. Then the uninhabited homes, they should be taken into consideration. If a building wants to participate, but there is high percentage of uninhabited homes, there should be a special mechanism for that, and it should be discussed as a separate topic, this problem with uninhabited homes. Next, municipal housing or company housing, they should be under a separate fund, or people who rent. We came to the conclusion that the owner should be the one to be evaluated, because it's not up to those who rent to do anything about the house. Another problem is the type of housing that's on souterrain level, and they're used for different business activities. They could participate in renovation programs. As a principle, they receive de minimis aid with a cap. So this would facilitate their participation, but also there is the problem that some of them may have already done this for other purposes. So again, it will result in some conflict. All of this is a problem. There are technical issues that we have to clarify. What about the participation of flats that have already been renovated? What costs would be deemed admissible for them? So there are a lot of elements that must be discussed in working groups. One project could systematize all this, highlight it, but these solutions are to be found in wider expert groups, people who work on such projects and have an idea what is going on the ground and have perspectives how to solve such issues. Thank you very much for your answer. Let me give you an example. Last year, under our survey, whether this definition would cover such cases, because, for example, in Leningrad, during the survey, we interviewed a single mother who has 2 children and rents. Could she make use of, will she be granted energy poverty benefits, and how would that be calculated? Well, the energy benefit is given to the apartment, not to the inhabitant. The renovation is a long-term measure. Again, energy poverty must be a mechanism, and if this definition at present is only concerned with long-term energy efficiency measures, if a mechanism is designed in future, it could be applied to other measures. In the future, we're going to talk about social climate fund, planning for long-term, short-term measures, assisting building investment and supporting incomes. And then we can see this definition could be applied for measures that would help the income of families. In such an occasion, it would be completely possible, insofar as these funds have such large scope. Because if currently the official poverty line means that 22% of the population are energy poor, energy assistance right now is given to 7% of the population, and with the certain adjustment that is to be made, it would increase to 12 or 13%. Such a definition would cover 30 or 40% of families. But the question is, will there be resources for such a wide range of people? So such a definition could be applied to such a family. Or when it comes to heating systems, as the owner of a movable heating system, she should also be eligible. So there should be a differentiation. When we're talking about households, if our starting point is not buildings but households, this mechanism should provide for participation under heating system and building and income criteria. If I may comment, Svetoslav, it is great that there is progress on the energy poverty definition, so many details, and at the same time attempts to streamline the procedures in terms of values, etc. I would like to say here that indeed focus is on property owners. The example that you gave, Svetlo, means that the property owner either has a number of properties, seeing that this person is leasing one, or in fact, this criteria that is currently active for heating assistance that are granted right now stipulate that the person who receives the benefit shouldn't have more than one property. In fact, the property status of beneficiaries of such assistance right now is very important. If you have any other sort of property, even if it's not a housing unit, if it is just a piece of land or a bungalow or whatever, all of this would mean that you are not within the scope for receiving energy assistance. You might have some property which brings you no income, but right now owning a property, whatever the property, is of huge importance when deciding who is eligible for energy assistance. Something which I thought is the most appropriate one for a long time. Personally, I think there should be some changes to the law on social assistance, and there should be a one-off assistance for energy renovation of the home. When people are energy poor under all the criteria of the definition, we shouldn't look at banking mechanisms granting them 100%. Let us not even talk about 100% grants right now. Let us focus on them receiving one-off assistance for energy renovation of their home, and they can apply for it when their building applies for energy renovation. Then this would mean greater responsibility for social services, because right now they are the ones who do this assessment, but it could simply mean another type of mechanism or social assistance. This is one of the possibilities. I think it's the easiest one to apply. Yes, I completely agree. If I may join in, can you hear me? Yes, indeed, Sveta, you have the floor. Asa, you're completely right. In principle, Theodora and I, in our joint work, have discussed the proposal that you just made to use income as the baseline and one-off assistance. So we have no differences here, but what we tried to do here was to see if we can find intersections in order to define the target groups of those who would receive a one-off assistance. Right now, we're not discussing the amount of this bulk assistance. They should, but we cannot unanimously answer who should be the target group to receive such a lump sum as assistance. Our work on the ground leaves us with the impression that, in theory, the calculator gives much higher numbers than the reality. What do I mean? We have 80 buildings participating under the project, and we are using them as an observation. What are their attitudes regarding payment? The percentage of people who say they can't pay is in fact smaller. Of course, it depends on the amount. When they say they can't pay, they mean that they can't afford any further burden on their budget. But in fact, there aren't many who say that. So, in my view, a broader discussion uniting various viewpoints would be fruitful here in order to find out which is the best target group. We all agree that there should be a lump sum as targeted assistance to vulnerable owners or energy poor owners. But who should they be? In our joint work with Mrs. Paneva, that's what we tried to move the discussion further in order to see under any objective indicators who falls within that category. This is a bit more complicated than I would like. There is a number of buildings where this initiative was launched. On the other hand, there is a discrepancy. After all, this is based on strict criteria on assessing it individually. The specificities in our country are such that we have flats of 100 or 140 square meters inhabited by one person. You saw the baseline in Theodorus' methodology. However, if we say to such a person, we're going to give to you what is under the law, and this person doesn't actually need it, again, we are in this situation. If we don't solve individual problems, we cannot achieve certain results. So indeed, this is a very complicated topic, and it has no simple answer. In principle, this discussion must continue along these lines in order to achieve some sort of agreement on which is the group, who are the ones who can't pay, why can't they pay. Some of them have people who will inherit the property from them, why can't they pay?
I fully agree that this is a complex picture, but have you thought about having two categories of energy poor people? Those who are undoubtedly energy poor, who live under the national poverty line. For them, there can be no doubt that they are not only poor but also energy poor, and this one-off lump amount to be unconditional assistance, and to have another more complex definition about energy poverty, which would allow a larger scope of people falling under different cases to have access to such support. Yes, by the way, this is how the reform has been drawn up. If you have read the Recovery and Resilience Plan, there is a definition, and it should be considered for the liberalization of the energy market. Only those who need to meet their basic heating needs should access the assistance, not 300,000 people, but to increase the database so that 600,000 or 1 million would be encompassed. I am of the opinion that such a definition would help move things ahead in order to have a national definition of the social umbrella to cover the needs of basic heating and cooling. The problem with renovation is so complex that if we assume a more complex and accurate approach, if it's hard to implement, we would not be successful. But for the purpose of liberalization of the energy market and for energy efficiency renovation, the definition should have two parts. So we have thought about this, and we don't have any principal differences with you that we need to have both parts of the definition. We had a proposal, and it is in the long-term strategy. There we have long explanations and reasoning why we need to distinguish between the two equitably, because one thing affects the necessity to be guaranteed the basic right not to die freezing, and the other has to do with not putting obstacles to initiatives. Although we don't have significant differences in our views, we still need to answer the question, what should be the criteria to disburse additional target assistance? I've been participating in this process for 15 years in different capacities, and I can tell you that the simpler something is, the better. The failure of the energy efficiency renovation of Bulgarian homes is due largely to the fact that a complex procedure was defined for those who would get the 100% grant. There would be an interinstitutional committee. The bank almost went bankrupt. There was a different approach, but again they wanted to provide 100% grants, and even if we work on the field now with the beneficiaries, we speak of not large amounts of people. Themselves say that a mother with a child with disabilities and an adult with mental disabilities would not be able to pay. But we're speaking about small amounts. We can. Is it admissible for the others to pay for them in order to have the problem resolved? In the demonstration project 10 years ago, we tested another approach. I speak a lot because I think that this is helpful in the discussion. At the initiative of the condominium ownership, there was a topic raised that if 1, 2 or 3 people in the building cannot afford to pay, they would put a stop to the whole process, and the other owners asked, is it possible for us to help? And there was a solution 50-50. I have mentioned this before. We thought this was a fair solution. It could be applied in a pilot project, so we thought if you collect the funds and pay 50% in order not to lose a huge picture, the project would provide the other 50%. In this way, we would encourage people, and in a fair way we would distribute the burden. I think it's worthwhile thinking in this direction. If all the other issues are resolved and only the financial one remains, probably the others could participate. A variation of this approach would be that as part of the social services, because housing policy should remain in the local realm, we talked about one-stop shop, how people go to a point to be informed. In Sofia it is hard to achieve, but this initiative should be of the local authorities. Judging from our experience, local authorities should be involved in supporting socially disadvantaged people especially with regard to energy renovation. For the purpose of renovation, this should pass through the local social policy, because at some places, not speaking about Sofia, but elsewhere, the municipal council can find solutions. These funds can come from different sources. There is a social climate fund. We are not acting on it. We say this may be a wonderful source of funding, but the question is how to channel these funds in order to reach the beneficiaries in the easiest, most optimal mechanism to the people. Sorry for taking too long, but this is a topic I'm very interested in. I would add that this should also be an equitable and fair way. Theodora has been raising a hand for a long time. Just allow me to make some clarifications. One of them is that it is possible to put a limit on the floorage area, for example, 100 or 120 square meters, and again, this floorage area, this is not a quantity of energy which is necessary for renovation, but for evaluating the incomes, and this is something different. It will not reflect the real quantity, because there are many particularities. Different apartments have different heating losses. This methodology will not be able to reflect this. This is not an energy audit, so this is just a proposal for criteria per income, for measures which would cover a larger scope of consumers, and this income criteria is available. We know what it is, what the target would be if we decide to use it. But what Asia proposed is something very useful at a time when we don't have such a definition, we don't have consensus, we don't have political will, and we can apply the official poverty line. We can start with this and then build on it. Although a number of surveys have been done, evidence has been provided, the official poverty line could be doubled if we don't want to go deeper. But if we apply this method, it will be much more objective and adequate, and with much more options. We have fruitful subsequent discussions when we speak about assistance. Of course, we can't wait to read the report Theodora mentioned with the final recommendations. I was very interested personally to hear how the original concept has changed after it was presented to the public. Thank you all for your patience. We talked more than we had planned, but this was an interesting discussion and an important one for the overall process of writing a definition for energy poverty and a subsequent mechanism for support with direct measures, and speaking of the more long-term energy efficiency measures. I would like to thank all our participants in the different panels today for their active participation, and to invite you for the last day of our conference. Tomorrow we start at 10 o'clock once again, and we will talk about clean air, climate change, and urban mobility. What are the challenges to sustainable mobility, and what are the solutions? Thank you. See you tomorrow.
Благодарим.
За хубавия форум и дискусии.
Благодаря.